The Truth of Girls.
Hi everyone. Well, this is a follow-up video on the others that I've done about our sort of autism journey or ASD journey with our son. I've actually had somebody kind of give me flack for even doing videos about him and the whole ASD thing. I guess because there's a stigma about ASD, which I think there just shouldn't be. And you know, this is something that we went through, and I think it's something that a lot of people go through also. And I just wanted to share our journey, maybe just as a kind of way to give you support if you're going through the same kind of thing. I guess he's not autistic by Kanner's definition, which was very narrow. And I think that a big part of the reason why Kanner's definition of autism was so narrow had to do with his own beliefs and also his own ambitions. I mean, this was a guy who was very ambitious, and I think it was very important to him to go down in history as having discovered this rare syndrome, which isn't really rare and which isn't really narrow either. The view that Asperger had all along was that autism existed along a continuum, going from what people call the low functioning or severe end. So he saw people from all the way on that end to all the way on the very high functioning end of Asperger's, where it's sort of, the question is this really a disorder, or is this just another kind of way of being? You know, where do you have the cutoff line? I guess the cutoff line has to do with when the person has problems with their behavior that are related to their way of being, that interfere with, I hate to use the word functioning, but they're functioning in the world and their relationships with people around them. And part of that also has to do with those people's maybe lack of understanding for that person. But so Asperger always had this view of autism as a continuum, which is closer to the definition that DSM has now of ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder. So my son probably would fit the best somewhere in what you call being an Aspie. And when I use the term Aspie rather than saying a person with Asperger's, it's because personally I have the view kind of more that it is more just a different way of being, not a disease. But I guess if you had to come up with some kind of label for him and the way he is and why his behavior was so disordered and so different, I guess Asperger's is what comes the closest to it. So though as it stands now, there is no term Asperger's in DSM. It's just ASD, and wherever you are on that continuum, I guess you could legitimately refer to yourself as having an autism spectrum disorder or being autistic. Although some Aspies will say autistic, and some people prefer to just be called Aspies. So he's somewhere around there. So on the road to the diagnosis, first thing that someone said to us after assessing him was severe inattentive ADHD that looks like autism but isn't, which is not actually in the DSM. And if it looks like autism, then who's to say that it's not autism, you know, without the testing? And I guess how do you differentiate between looks like versus is would be by understanding the processes underneath that are driving the behavior you can observe on the surface. It is the case that two different doctors could have two different opinions on someone who's on the very high functioning end of the ASD spectrum. One could say it's severe inattentive ADHD, and another one could say it's mild ASD.
Gunner, the train!
In the end, I would go by the testing. The testing was actually very specific. They were looking for very particular things, and a lot of those things showed up in there. So, you know, I think it was accurate. After saying that, you know, there was a problem and it's maybe something like severe inattentive ADHD, the next thing they found out was that he's gifted. He has very high IQ. He is gifted with some academics, and he learns at an accelerated pace. What got him the testing for ASD was that our social worker observed that there was something unusual about the way he played, and this was something that I had noticed, and this was what brought me back to wondering if he did have some kind of an ASD, because I had studied education and play of children, and I was looking for rich play, and it wasn't happening. not even real imaginative play. I mean, it wasn't stereotypical, but it was restricted and it wasn't flexible. And there was something definitely just odd about his play. And our social worker came over and she observed that and requested the testing, and that's how he ended up getting it. And after he'd spent 2 years at the day program, where they said Asperger's is probably the label that would fit him the best, but at the same time they disagreed that he was autistic. I think it's just a matter of different view of what is autistic, as in, yes, he does not have classic autism by Kanner's definition, but he is on what they now call the autism spectrum. After 2 years of being there, they also diagnosed him with a expressive language learning disability. I had to go and Google this, and from what I understand, it has to do with difficulty organizing your thoughts, because all his language is good. I mean, he has a very good vocabulary. You know, there's no problem speaking, but there is some kind of difficulty expressing himself. The nouns and the verbs are all good, but there was something about the way it was put together that was unusual. And when it came to writing, he had a really hard time expressing himself. So after 2 years, I finally said expressive language learning disability, something like that. Again, you know, difficulty with expressive language is something you see when people have an ASD. So, you know, I just don't see, what is the big deal? Like, what is the stigma? You know how a lot of times parents say, I want my kids to have a better life, and it's like, I want you to be able to go to college because I didn't get to go to college, or I want you to be able to whatever, whatever. Well, in my case, if I had a thing like that, it's, I don't want you to go through what I went through. I was gifted, but also I had these behaviors that were, I guess, problematic. But part of the problem, okay, for me growing up was that I just felt misunderstood. They misunderstood the behavior and why it was happening, and they misunderstood how gifted I was. So it's a bit of a waste. Now, I'm not, you know, bitter about it or anything, but I'm going to learn from my experience. And I don't want my son to go through that. That people focus so much on the behavior that they neglect the giftedness. Or they'll say, well, you're so smart, but you're not living up to your potential. Growing up, I often heard something along the lines of, you're so smart, but you act like an idiot, you know? You know, especially when you're in a school or something like that. If people don't understand that, call it a disorder if you want, whatever, but the person is an Aspie, they have just a different way of thinking. They may not perceive things the way that everybody else perceives, so the reactions to them are different, their behavior is different. I don't want my son to be misunderstood, and I don't want his gifts to go to waste. Bottom line. So is Asperger's or ASD just a different type of person, or a disorder, or both? Well, I think, you know, maybe it's a mix. But I think how much it is a disorder may depend in a good part on how well the people around you understand you and how well they're able to be supportive. With the right kind of support, it really brings out the best in anyone. But, you know, especially with someone who is on the spectrum, that's really, really key. And the videos that I showed you concerning our journey so far, they showed some of pictures of my son and some videos of some of the problematic behaviors he had, but I don't want you to think that that is all there is to him, that's how he is all the time. Yeah, like sometimes he'll have, you know, unusual behaviors, but most of the time he's just a really great kid. I saw, it was in another video referring to this misconception that people with ASD spend all their time engaging in neurotic behavior, which isn't true, you know. It partly has to do with your stress level. And again, how well you're supported and understood. And I think this is what the Asperger's experts refer to as being in defense mode. They're just in defense mode. They're just overwhelmed. And they kind of, you know, shut down into themselves. And with the little kids, you see worse behavior. I think that has something to do with it. I saw that in my son. And the thing is, the day program that he went to was really good for him, really supportive. And in this supportive environment, he was able to make friends. He was able to work at his own academic pace. And he's gained a lot of self-confidence. And we've become a lot more understanding of him. And the school also, you know, people have become more accommodating. And the result is that actually he's blossomed a lot. And he's a lot happier. And this is what all parents want, to see their children do well and blossom like a little flower. It's just the nicest, most beautiful thing that I could see. So why did I call him autistic? Well, you know, he's an Aspies on the spectrum. Partly because I want you to know what we went through, in case you're going through it. And also because I kind of want to be defiant of the stigma. I talk about my own stuff with this. And I said about my son too. Because, I mean, if I told you he was dyslexic, where's the stigma, you know? So why is there a stigma about ASD and about Asperger's? It's a puzzle, right? Everybody knows what it is. It's in the DSM, but at the same time, it's really hard to say, well, what is it, right? Because it comes in so many different forms. So I guess I'm trying to understand the puzzle, and I'm just sharing my experience of that with you. So that's it. And thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.